This piece of legislation changes everything for landlords. Rishi Sunak's government wants it to go through, and so does Keir Starmer's Labour. We go through all of the main changes and things you have to look out for so you don't get hit with a nasty fine. So what is this bill that's coming for landlords and changing everything? Well, it's the Renters Reform Bill. And its purpose is, according to the government, to improve the system for both the 11 million private renters and 2.3 million landlords in England. But some people will argue that it seems to help one side more than the other. There are a few main changes that are going to affect all landlords and tenants. They range from ending tenancies, rent increases, evictions, and more. And there could be even more changes on the horizon that we'll cover at the end, so stick around for that. Let's start with the end of tenancies as you know it. The end of fixed-term tenancies. Fixed-term tenancies are coming to an end. Every tenancy, yes, every tenancy, will now be a periodic one, meaning it's just a rolling tenancy on a month-to-month basis. This could spell havoc for the student housing market if amendments aren't made, since student lets rely on fixed terms to function properly. But seeing as the bill still hasn't had its second reading, there's still time for amendments. You can stay up to date with the amendments and potential changes by following the progress of the bill. We have some useful links in the description. Alternatively, you could just join our free property newsletter using the link in the description. So, if tenancies are all on a rolling month-to-month basis with no fixed term, then how do they end? Well, the tenant can give 2 months' notice at any time, including on the first day of the tenancy. Yes, you heard that right. So you go through the marketing process, viewings, decide on a tenant, referencing, the tenant moves in, and boom. A few days later, a tenant decides to hand in notice saying they're going to leave in 2 months. So, instead of a tenant renting a place for a few years, you just got a tenant who just needed a place for 2 months. Okay, so the tenant can just give 2 months notice whenever. But what about the landlord? How can a landlord end the tenancy? Well, to start, you can't just get rid of them for no reason, because Section 21 no-fault evictions are going to disappear. However, the idea is that Section 8 evictions should be easier. From now on, a landlord needs a valid reason to evict a tenant, and this is meant to provide more security to tenants. The main ones you'll want to know about are rent arrears, antisocial behaviour, and selling the property or moving into the property. Rent arrears. For rent arrears, the tenant has to have at least 2 months worth of rent arrears for the landlord to submit a notice to evict. So, if they're paid monthly, it's 2 months. If they're paid weekly, it's 8 weeks. And if they're paid quarterly or yearly, it's 3 months of arrears. But a mandatory notice is triggered if the tenant has had 2 months worth of arrears 3 times in 3 years. This mandatory ground is to prevent tenants from just topping up their arrears balance before a court hearing to restart the whole process. It's also meant to prevent tenants getting kicked out after a one-off financial shock that led to arrears. Some landlords are frustrated with the end of Section 21 disappearing because it helps get rid of tenants with antisocial behaviour. Antisocial behaviour. Under the new rules, the notice period for antisocial behaviour will drop from 4 weeks to 2 weeks, and the definition of antisocial behaviour is going to be expanded to cover a wider set of behaviours. So in theory, this should be better for landlords, as long as the court process can keep up. But that's a big question mark. The court system in the UK for evicting tenants is notoriously slow, so a 2-week cut in the notice period might make no difference if the court system still takes months on end to evict a non-cooperating tenant. And let's face it, if they're a tenant being evicted for antisocial behaviour, it's less likely that they're going to be cooperating with you. Selling a property. Another valid ground for eviction is selling the property or moving into the property. If the landlord wants to sell the property, or they themselves or close family want to move in, then they can field notice to evict under these grounds. But the landlord can't remarket the property for let within 3 months. This is to stop landlords from kicking a tenant out just to let it back out again straight away without actually selling the property or moving in themselves. They also can't do this in the first 6 months of a tenancy. Although it's easy to wonder how this could be manipulated to move a family member in just to remarket the property again at a higher rent after 3 months. Rent increases are another big change. At the moment, you can increase the rent after a fixed term has ended, or during one if you have a rent review clause that allows you to. With the Renters Reform Bill, this stops. You can only increase rent once every year, and you must give at least 2 months' notice to the tenant. Tenants can appeal the rent increase if they think it's above the market rate. The government says this is to avoid backdoor evictions. Well, the landlord will put in a stupid rent increase, and then the tenant obviously can't pay it, so they move out. A redress scheme. A completely new ombudsman for the private rental sector. Landlords will have to be part of it. Tenants can use this redress scheme to raise complaints against the landlord, and the ombudsman can force the landlord to provide an apology or explanation, pay compensation up to £25,000, or take other actions in the interests of the complainant. The idea is that this will resolve issues quicker for tenants, as it won't need to go through the court system. At least, that's the plan. And there's also going to be a new database for landlords. Private Renter Property Portal. This is a database of landlords which is meant for two reasons: to help landlords stay compliant and to give tenants extra info so they can make more informed choices on tenancies. They also say that too often tenants find out too late that they are renting out a substandard property from landlords, and councils don't know who to track down when serious issues arise. With this database, landlords would be required to register their property on the portal, and local councils can take enforcement action on landlords that don't join the portal. Next up is pets. Britain is a nation of pet lovers, with an estimated 53% of UK adults having pets. And according to this study, 76% of tenants currently own or aspire to own a pet, with 1 in 3 saying their pets help their mental well-being. That's a lot of renters that have or probably want to have pets. So you can see why the government would want to make it easy for people to keep pets. However, a small percentage of private landlords list their properties as allowing animals. The new bill gives tenants the right to request a pet in the property. A landlord must consider and cannot unreasonably refuse. What counts as unreasonable will probably vary from property to property and the type of pet involved. So for this, we'll have to wait and see how things play out in practice. But as a condition of giving consent, landlords will be able to require tenants to have insurance covering the risk of pet damage. The bill indicates that a tenant must provide in writing confirmation that they have acquired insurance for their pet, or that they are willing to pay the landlord reasonable costs to cover the landlord's insurance in case of pet damage. So that's all the main changes, for now. But the government also wants to bring forward legislation to do the following: bring the decent home standard to the private rented sector. This is to help deliver the government's levelling up mission to halve the number of non-decent rented homes by 2030. They also want to make it illegal for landlords and agents to have blanket bans on renting to tenants in receipt of benefits or with children. Finally, they also want to strengthen councils' enforcement powers and require councils to report on enforcement activity. But like any legislation and government proposals, things change and U-turns happen. We all saw how the EPC rules for landlords got changed and the EPC C and above requirement got scrapped. You can stay up to date with changes like these for free by joining the weekly Beacon property newsletter. The link is in the description or at propertybeacon.co.uk. If you like this video, please make sure that you like and subscribe so we know to make more content just like this. If you want anything different, let us know in the comments.